Yo, yo. Welcome back to Son of a Preacher Man. As always, I'm your host, the Soapman. Now, I've cut the music at the beginning of this episode so that we can have a little chit chat. Now, a few episodes back, when I started in the book of Samuel, I talked about how it was going to be three individuals that stood out in this book. And these three individuals was going to engage in this trilogy of power, this triangle of power. Now, I know that sounds funny. You know, trilogy, it really means three stories. But these three individuals that I'm talking about, they each have a story within the book of Samuel. So it is kind of like a trilogy, you know, and each one of these characters in this story, they gonna vie for power. They gonna vie for reign over Israel, they gonna vie for rulership over the land of Israel, or what will eventually become called the land of Israel. And right off the bat, we talked about one of the first individuals in this triangle of power, and that was Samuel. And we, went through his life. We saw how he started out, how he evolved, and how he became the last judge of Israel. The second character we introduced a couple episodes ago, and that was Saul. And Saul ended up becoming the first king of Israel. And so you see how these individuals, their separate lives intertwine with each other at some point. They run parallel to each other. They're perpendicular. They intertwine. They weave in and out. So it's really no, escaping the entanglement of these three individuals' stories. So in this episode, we gonna introduce the last of these three characters that I said are going to joust. I don't know what the correct word is. Contend, vie for power. And after the introduction of this last character, the first good thing about this is you won't have to hear me talk about this triangle or trilogy of power that I love to talk about so much. The second thing you should know is that after the introduction of this third individual, nothing will be the same. Everything is going to change with the introduction of this third individual. He is going to turn the politics of Israel upside down on its head. He's going to set a standard. He's going to set a precedent. This individual is special. And so I'm real excited about this episode. I'm ready to jump and dig right off into it. Just a little personal note. If I seem over enthusiastic about this story, it is because this is one of my favorite stories, not only in the Bible, but in life. I'm a sucker for, fantasy films and fantasy stories, anything with dragons and witches and giants and swords and shields, Game of Thrones type stuff. And this story is all that stuff combined. And the cherry on top is it's not fantasy, it's real life. So if you never heard this story before, boy, are you in for a treat. If you have, and it's one of your favorite stories like it is mine, buckle up. We're going to dig deep off into it. You know what I'm saying? Rip open the outer coverings, dig right off into the minutia. You know how I like to do, and I like to bring these ancient stories to life. So let's see what the Soapman do with it, baby. Let's get it jumping off without further ado. Now, in case you didn't know, we are in the book of Samuel. Are y'all ready, folks? Ladies and gentlemen, Son of a Preacher Man proudly presents to you the first book of Samuel, part 5, The Shepherd. Okay, so what we starting off at? We starting off in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 1 through 7. And it reads, and the Lord said unto... Now hold on. Before we go any further, we got to do a recap. You know I always do one. In the last video, Saul, the established first king of Israel, he was at war with his enemies on all sides. He wasn't even king but 2 years. And all his enemies, it wasn't like they waited till his second year to attack him, but by his second year, his reign was in tumult. It was in turmoil. It was in jeopardy. So in the last episode, we saw how Saul committed I talked about 3 blunders, 3 errors that Saul was gonna make before he hit rock bottom. And in the last episode, we talked about 2 of them. Samuel gave Saul specific instructions on what God wanted him to do. And Saul couldn't follow those instructions. Not 1 time, but 2 times Saul failed to follow instructions. He folded. And we saw evidence of this at his inauguration, where he was hiding among the stuff when Samuel was looking to promote him to be king over Israel. So we see this ominous doom and gloom hanging over Saul throughout his career. His fatal flaw, that when he gets under pressure, he folds. So in the last episode, Samuel brought down God's rebuke, the ultimate rejection, the worst rejection I've ever seen in history. God rejects Saul as being the first king over Israel and tells him, I've chosen someone better than you, someone that's going to do a better job, someone I like better, someone I have confidence in them like I had in you at one time. But even more, because what you're about to see is this individual that God has picked to replace Saul is a doozy. God's about to show you no one does it better. 1 Samuel chapter 16 verses 1 through 7 reads, and the Lord said unto Samuel, how long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite. Did I say that right? The Bethlehemite. For I have provided me a king among his sons. Oh, here we go. And Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me. Now you see, I got that in big, bold, red print. And I want to take a moment to explain why. Okay? So check this out. Remember how I said these 3 individuals that we're going to talk about, they're going to contend and they're going to vie for power. If you remember back in my last episode, Samuel, who told Saul to attack the Amalekites to avenge the Israelites from long before. I'm not going to get into what the grudge was, but Samuel tells Saul to attack the Amalekites and leave none alive. But Saul brings the king back home alive. And that's when Samuel tells Saul, oh, you done messed up. You done messed up big. Bringing the best of the fat cattle and sheep home and bringing the king home alive when God told you to destroy everything. So Saul tried to lie his way out of it. Samuel wasn't having it, and Saul finally confessed. In an instinct of primordial and primitive instinct on Saul's behalf, as Samuel turns to walk away, Saul grabs his mantle out of desperation and it rips. Samuel tells him God is going to tear the kingdom from you just like you ripped my mantle. And so Saul is clearly on the ropes here, okay? He goes on with the ceremony and he talks Samuel into continuing on with the ceremony. And at the end of the ceremony, Samuel says, bring out King Agag of the Amalekites, whom you saved alive. And he proceeds to hack King Agag up into pieces right before Saul. And this is what I mean by they gonna vie for power. Who's in power? Who's in control of Israel? Who ultimately is? Samuel anointed a king, and Saul is king. But right here with Agag, Saul must take a back seat to Samuel because Samuel represents God, and ultimately God is ultimately in charge. But here, fast forward, God tells Samuel, why are you sulking around, moping around for Saul when you see I've made my decision? I've made my mind up. Why are you sulking around? What's the word that he uses? Mourning for Saul. He says, go to Jesse the Bethlehemite's home, where I have a king among his sons. And Samuel says, how? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. Now, why is this man afraid of Saul when he just made Saul take a back seat to him? Sorry, I had to sip my beverage. Well, that's what I mean by they vying for power. They tossing this power around back and forth. It's a tug of war. And let's see who this third character is. Let's introduce this third character. He's a son of Jesse. Samuel says, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he's the king. He will kill me. If he finds out I'm frolicking about anointing kings, king making. And the Lord said, take an heifer with thee and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show thee what thou shalt do. And thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee. And Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem. And the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, comest thou peaceably? Look how they acting when they see Samuel. The people of Israel fear Samuel. That's why Saul took a back seat to him. He didn't have to. Well, he did, but he didn't. It's a lot of nuance in it. It's all about how you look at it. No, he didn't have to, but it behooved him to. See, right here it says, when Samuel comes to Bethlehem, it says, and the elders of the town trembled at his coming. See, they know the legend of Samuel. They know the cloth that he's come from, that he's cut from. So they say, comest thou peaceably? And he said, peaceably I am come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and called them to the sacrifice. And it came to pass, when they were come, that he looked on Eliab and said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Now I'm going to get into what I got in big bold red print in a second, but let's go back up a little bit in the verses. It says, Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me. And then it says, and the Lord said, take a heifer with thee and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show thee what thou shalt do. Now, if you look at this carefully, it seems that the Lord is providing Samuel with a lie. Did the Lord just give Samuel a good lie to cover up his clandestine activities? No. That's just the way it's written. See, what's actually going on is Samuel is considering these things to himself in his own mind. But when it's written down later, the Lord is given credit for the idea that Samuel has. Much like when Moses turns off the main path into the wilderness to fool Pharaoh into thinking that he was lost, but when he wrote it down later, he says the Lord told him to turn off the main path. The Lord gave him this great idea. Just a fun fact there. Now going back down to what I got in big bold red letters, it says, surely the anointed is before him. This is what Samuel says when he sees Jesse's oldest son. Remember, Samuel's on the hunt. He's on the hunt for a king. And when he sees Jesse's oldest son, he says, he looks at his height. He looks at his stature. He looks at the outward appearance. Much like Saul, he looks the part. But God says, I don't judge like that, home biscuit. You leave this judging and anointing to the Lord. 1 Samuel chapter 16 verses 8 through 13 reads, Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by. And he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, The Lord hath not chosen these. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil, and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. Now let me just unpack all this, because it's indeed a lot to unpack. Okay? Samuel, under the false pretense of being in Bethlehem to sacrifice a heifer unto the Lord, he's there to anoint one of Jesse's sons as king over Israel. Jesse has 8 sons. 8. Let me tell you something. Back in the times that we talking about, 1100 BCE or 1000 BCE, somewhere around now, having a lot of kids was a blessing. It was smart. They could help you work. They could help you manage your affairs. Having boys especially was a blessing, and it was lucrative for your defense, for the upkeep of your home. Jesse had 8 sons. He's doing well. By ancient standards, he's extremely blessed. 8 sons. When Samuel comes to anoint one of them as king, Jesse has 7 sons that he passes before Samuel, and God rejects all 7. Samuel said, Are there no sons left? Jesse says, Well, yeah, my youngest, the shepherd, he's out with the sheep. Samuel says, We won't sit down till he gets here. Go get him. We won't sit down till he gets here. David walks in, God says that's him. Now, what does the Bible mean when it says he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance? Well, what that means is he was of a reddish color. The word ruddy means reddish. And of withal of a beautiful countenance, he was cute. He was beautiful. He was young. He was cute. He was favored is what he was. And there was something about him that stood out immediately. Samuel knew that this was God's chosen, God's hand-picked, and his name is David. So, imagine being one of David's brothers. And you done been trotted out before Samuel and you don't know what this is all about. And each one of you and your brothers gets passed over. Then here come your youngest brother, who you probably been beating up and terrorizing your entire life. And Samuel pulls out the oil and anoints him king. Now, I got brothers. And I know how it is to have brothers. So I can't help but wonder if those other brothers got jealous. I mean, Samuel came in, passed over what seemed to be the best of what Jesse had to offer. And he picked David. He picked David over them all. I showed this slide before when I showed Samuel getting anointed, because it's so similar. Samuel got anointed at a young age to be high priest or to be a priest in Israel, and David gets anointed at a young age to be king. Are his brothers jealous? Let me know in the comment section if you would have been jealous. Let me know in the comment section if you think his brothers was jealous. Look at the way his brothers is looking at. Look at this argument going on in the background. See, that's real life to me. That's how I imagine it would have really went. That's why I use this slide, even though it's blurry and you can't really see it. Look at this dude's face right here. He's suspicious as hell. He like, dude, and look at this dude. He is like, what is going on? So here we have it. The third character who's often portrayed as a child. But I'm going to challenge that. I'm not sure if he was a child or how old he was when he got anointed at this point. He probably was a teenager. But I'm going to challenge this portrayal of David as this young child, or as this, little wimpy, skinny, limp noodle, wimpy kid. Okay, this emaciated, little scrawny kid that a lot of portraits portray him as. 1 Samuel chapter 16 verses 14 through 22 reads, "But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servants said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants, which are before thee, to seek out a man, who is a cunning player on an harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit of God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. And Saul said unto his servants, Provide me now with a man that can play well, and bring him to me. Then answered one of his servants and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him." Now, before I go on any further, I want you to take note of the accolades and praises that this man heaps upon David. let's take a look. He says, I know a man. He's cunning in playing. So right there, that should have been enough. He's what you looking for. You looking for a good heart player? I know a guy. But he goes even further. He says, and a mighty valiant man. Now, why would he be describing a child or a teenager as a mighty valiant man? See, the Bible gives you clues. It gives you clues to the answers that you're looking for. We weren't there, so let's take the word of someone who was. And he describes him. You don't listen to me. Don't let your imagination run away. They're telling you the answers which you seek. Want to know how old David was at that time, at the time we talking about? Well, he's being described as cunning in playing and a mighty valiant man. Not only that, and a man of war. This person who we just introduced, David, already has a reputation. And so what do you think he is, 12? He also says, and prudent in matters, meaning wise in matters, and a comely person. He's handsome, and the Lord is with him. Now, folks, I don't know what else he could have said about the man. If that wasn't just shy of a high school cheer, he might as well been like, give me a D, give me an A. I mean, he really poured it on. Or is he just telling the truth? These are clues. We just learning about David. And look, already we see that to this man that's describing him, this is somebody special. This is somebody who stands out in the crowd. He calls him a man of war. This is not a child we are talking about. I contend this is a teenager, 17, 18, or even early 20s. It says, wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David his son unto Saul. And David came to Saul, and stood before him. And he loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in my sight. 1 Samuel chapter 16 verses 23 reads, and it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took in harp and played with his hand. And Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. Now, folks, let's unpack this. Oh, Saul, since Samuel brought down God's rebuke, since Samuel told him that God had rejected him and was soon to replace him, Saul, the first king of Israel, has not been well. He sits around moping. He sits around brooding. He's suspicious. He's volatile. He's explosive. He's prone to fits of anger. The Bible says it is an evil spirit sent by the Lord. An evil spirit sent by the Lord. You see where I'm going with this? I'm not going to dig off into it because I don't have time. But it says an evil spirit sent by the Lord. Now what could that mean? Leave in the comments section if you want to comment on what that means. How is it that the Lord sends an evil spirit to plague and vex Saul? And leave in the comment if you want me to explain it. So one of Saul's servants suggests this wonderful character that he heaps all these praises and accolades upon as the candidate that Saul's looking for. Saul says, get him for me. And so they send to Jesse, and Jesse does not hesitate. He packs David up with gifts for Saul and sends him to his king. And you know what? It works. Saul likes David. And when he plays the harp, Saul is ameliorated. His unnerving, his fits of rage, his prone to being snapped, his problem is ameliorated. Now, if you don't know what that means, it means assuaged. It means resolved. Okay? David is the antidote to this poison that King Saul. Did I say Paul? I don't know if I called him Paul at all. But if I did, that was an error on my point. But David is the antidote to King Saul's poison. And so, anytime King Saul is feeling down and out and in the slumps, David plays the harp for him. And King Saul can relax. And it's so ironic. It's so ironic that David is Saul's replacement and he doesn't even know it. And he's dependent on David. He likes David. And why wouldn't he? But Saul does not have a clue that this young son of Jesse is his replacement. And it's so ironic because that's so God. Who else could pull this off? To sit your replacement right up under your nose, in your face, and you favor him. Saul doesn't have a clue. Look at God at work. Saul's replacement is sitting right in front of his face, serving him, and he does not have a clue. It is so, what's the word I'm looking for? Humiliating. But not really, because it's God doing it to you. You don't stand a chance. That's really what I'm trying to show you. You don't stand a chance when God puts you in his crosshairs. How slick, how cunning is what's going on right now. And here's the thing. Saul likes David. He likes him. He likes him so much he sends a letter home to his father Jesse. He says, can we keep him? I want him to be my armor bearer. So now David isn't just playing for Saul when he's in a bad mood. David isn't just playing a harp for Saul when he's having mood swings. Now he's his armor bearer. Okay? He's armor bearer to the king. How's that for first impressions? 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 1 through 9 reads, now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Sholach, in Azekah, in Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Now look, I have this in big bold red print for a reason. We about to dig right off into this, okay? So let me reread this. It says, Israel stood on one mountain, and the Philistines stood on a mountain opposite them, and a valley was in between. perfect grounds for a one-on-one battle. And it says, and there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose, and it's in big bold red print for a reason, it says whose height was 6 cubits and a span, and he had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. Now, maybe it's just me, but I've not known the Bible to go into such detail about a man. Okay, let's keep reading. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me, and kill me. Then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. It's a lot to unpack, folks. Let's get to it. First and foremost, as I said before, the Bible goes into explicit detail about this man. It gives his height. It tells you he has a helmet of brass. It says he's armed with a coat of mail. It gives you the weight of that coat of mail. 5,000 shekels of brass. It says that he had greaves upon his legs, a target of brass between his shoulders. It says the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, whatever that is. And his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. Somebody else is carrying his shield for him. By all accounts, ladies and gentlemen, this is talking about a giant. Okay? That's what it seems to be talking about on its surface. A giant. Why else would it go into so much detail about his height, his weapons, and his armaments? This is Goliath. He is by all tradition, education, and teaching a giant. Not just any giant, but an Anakim giant, a son of Anak, the worst type of giants. Now, if you want more on this subject, go to my video, Giants, Men of Renown. I did a 3-part trilogy on this subject because it was so interesting to me, and I researched it for a full 7 years. Anywho, I'm not gonna rehash what I already did a video on, but let's just gloss over this. The problem is not whether Goliath was a giant or not. The problem is in how tall or how big was Goliath. Now I'm gonna break this down, okay? At least the best I can. So I'm gonna give both sides of the argument, and I'm gonna tell you where I lie in the argument, okay? So, look at me for a second. First and foremost, the first question you should be asking is, how big is a cubit? The Bible says his height was 6 cubits and a span. So how big is a cubit? That should be your first question. The answer to that is kind of tricky. A cubit is from your elbow to the tip of your finger. The only problem is all men wasn't created equal. And a man who's 6'5", from the tip of his elbow to the tip of his fingertip, well, that's gonna be longer than a man that's 5'2". So it's not an exact number. Here's the thing, folks. A cubit can be anywhere between 17 inches to almost 22 inches. It's varied from place to place, and it's varied over time. For instance, in Israel, it was like 18, 19 inches, or between 17 and 19 inches. But in Egypt, the royal cubit that was used was almost 22 inches. And the royal cubit that was in Egypt was also used by the Hebrews in the land of Canaan. So it's hard to go off of just by, you know what I'm saying, it was saying that Goliath was 6 cubits. Furthermore, this is where the real tricky part comes in. The King James Version of the Bible that we use today, it comes from what's called the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text says that Goliath was 6 cubits and a span. But there's an older version of the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek before it was translated into what we have as the standard modern version. Before the Masoretic text, it was a Greek version called the Septuagint. And in that version, it says Goliath was 4 cubits and a span. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found, I don't know, within the last 10, 20 years, they are the oldest existing text of the Bible. And they agree with the Greek Septuagint. It says in the Dead Sea Scrolls that Goliath was 4 cubits and a span. So, a cubit is roughly 1.5 feet. At 4 cubits and a span, that would make Goliath 6'6" tall. If you go by the Masoretic text, 6 cubits and a span, that would make Goliath 9 feet 6 inches tall. Big difference, right? Okay, so those are the two opposing sides. One side says Goliath is 6 feet 6 inches tall, and the other side says Goliath was 9 feet 6 inches tall. Real quick before we go any further, let me just tell you where I stand. I stand with the latter. I say that Goliath was indeed 9 feet 6 inches tall. And let me just give you my initial argument before I dig off into the details. The Bible separates this character and talks about him in great detail, and we're going to go through each of the components that I want to argue as to why Goliath is 9 feet 6 inches tall. And I'm going to give the other side argument too, and because I want you to make up your mind for yourself and leave it in the comment section what you think, who you agree with. Was he 6 feet 6 inches tall, or was he 9 feet 6 inches? Or was he 9 feet 6 inches tall? So, just right off the bat, this character Goliath, he is a giant. That's not an argument. The argument is, what is a giant? Okay? So the Bible takes special care and goes into great detail about everything about this man's height, his stature, his attire. It's very detailed. It gives a very detailed description about his size. So initially off the bat, we see that the extraordinary thing about this person is his size. Now the question is, what exactly is that size? People that argue that Goliath is 6'6", one of the main arguments that they make is this. They say, well, the average person at those during this time period was about 5'3" tall. So a man who was 6'6" tall would be a giant to those people. And I think it's a legitimate argument. Not only that, they say, hey, the oldest texts say that the man was 6'6" tall. What is the argument about? So I'm gonna address the average height of man at this time being 5'3", and that a man who's 6'6" tall would have been a giant to them. I'm gonna address that in a moment. But first, let me address these old texts that say that Goliath was 4 cubits in a span, which is the equivalent of 6'6" tall. I believe all the texts are saying the same thing. And here's why. You have the Dead Sea Scrolls. When those Dead Sea Scrolls were written, the writers were trying to describe Goliath's height. So they said 4 cubits in a span. Now we don't know how long a cubit was at the time those Dead Sea Scrolls were written. But we know they're trying to convey a message. They're telling you 4 cubits in a span. We don't know how long a cubit is. For all we know, at that time, 4 cubits in a span may have equaled 9 feet 6 inches. So, the Greek Septuagint is written, and it agrees with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Get around to the Masoretic text. The size of a cubit has changed by this time. Thousands of years have passed. The size of a cubit has changed. It's changed a bunch of times before the time of the Masoretic text. But now here we are at the Masoretic text time. The size of a cubit has changed and it has shortened. Therefore, in order for them to be the equivalent of 4 cubits, they had to make it 6. Maybe they knew what they were talking about. Maybe they were saying, hey, they're saying this dude is 9 foot 6 inches tall, but today the cubit is shorter. So in order for us to convey their message clearly and articulate it correctly, we need to add more cubits so that people during our time know exactly how tall he was. I think there's a chance that all the texts agree with each other. That's my take on it. Now, I'll address the argument that the average person was 5'3", and so a 6'6" person would have been a giant. I'm gonna address that in 1 second. I just want to talk about Goliath overall. Just in general, what we know, what common sense tells us before we get into the science of it. And you know I love the science of it because science produces heavy evidence. You don't have to take, it's one thing to not take my word for it, but it's another thing to deny the gorilla or elephant in the room, okay? So, just by his description, Goliath seems to stand out. And I want you to know, my in-depth studies of the Bible, my in-depth study of the Bible started with Goliath, started with the giants in the Bible. They were so fascinating to me. Even to this day, they still are. Where they came from, how they came about, what's the science behind these gigantic fantasy men that once literally actually walked and roamed the earth. What it would have been like to be standing next to them, to look upon them, to be facing them in battle. It must have been terrifying. How true were the stories and the legends of them. You know, the Greeks talk about these giants. They worshiped them as gods. They talked about them and believed in them as though they were real. And the Bible, it co-signs, it lends credence to some of what they say. So Goliath, on the surface, seems to be this marvel of a man, this phenomenon. You know, just reading about him and looking at what they say about him just at the surface. They talk about how he had a helmet, I think of brass. This says bronze. It talks about the weight of the coat, the weight of his coat of mail. It says he had a spear like a weaver's beam, greaves upon his legs, and a sword. Okay, so this man is coming ready for battle. He's like a tank almost. You have to understand the time period that we're talking about, okay? We're talking about 1100, 1000 BCE. The armaments and the garments that they are describing is the best of the best at this time. What I'm trying to explain to you is that the Philistines have armed this individual and have done everything within their power to make sure that he has the latest and most state-of-the-art equipment for defense and offense. They have invested heavily in this individual. You can tell just by the description of his arms and his coat of mail. You can tell just by the description of what he's wearing. You could tell by the description that this is a highly valued, elite soldier, the best of the best. They're hitting him, they're hitting you with everything they've got. And they've done the best. They've done their best. They've done everything within their capability to ensure his success. Man, it took a lot for me to get that out correctly. Woo! Sorry, folks. Anyway, this man is armed to the teeth. Very descriptive, very detailed description of this man. He is armed to the teeth. His armor is the best money can buy at this time. It's the best money can buy. Do you remember how we talked about in last episode how the Bible talked about how poorly armed the Israelites were? The Israelites had to come to the Philistines to sharpen their gardening tools. If they wanted weapons, if they wanted a sword, they had to buy them from the Philistines. The Philistines weren't going to sell them to them. If they had a sword and they wanted that sword sharpened, they had to go to the Philistines. The Philistines had all the resources. And they occupied and controlled most of the land, even the land that the Israelites stayed on. That's why the Philistines were Saul's chiefest enemies. So, Goliath, before we get into the science of it, just the common sense evidence, it's clear he's no regular Philistine. I hope we are all in agreement on that. It is clear this man is above average, no pun intended. I truly hope we can all agree on that. We ain't got to the argument of how big he is yet, but I hope we can all agree on the fact that he's big. He's extraordinary. There's something special about this man. He's big. Okay? Some people say 6'6". Some people say 9'6". Now here's my argument. I'm 5'9". Okay? I was just in Cracker Barrel a couple weeks ago, and there was a dude in there who was about 6'5", 6'6", maybe 6'7". Remember a couple episodes ago when Saul got anointed as king? The Bible said that from the shoulders upward, Saul was higher than any other man. So what does that tell you? That tells me that Saul is at least 6 feet tall. Because if you from the shoulders up are higher than any other man, and the average height is 5'3", then you at least 6 feet tall. Because this guy who was 6'6", 6'7", I'm 5'9". I came up to a little bit. I came up to his shoulder, and that's kind of what the Bible described with Saul. But here's the thing. The average man being 5'3", well, that's only average. Do you mean to sit here and tell me that you believe every single person back at that time was 5'3"? Is that what you expect me to believe? It's okay, maybe you do believe that, but is that what you expect me to believe? You don't think it was people that was 5'5"? If the average height is 5'3", you don't think it was people that was 5'5" or 5'7"? You don't think, if the average height is 5'3", you don't think it would be people that would be considered tall, that was 5'6", 5'7", 5'8", 5'9", 6 feet even? Would you go on a limb and say back at the time where people was 5'3", that there were some 6 foot individuals? And the Bible says Saul, from the shoulders up, was higher than any man, be he average or an outlier. Now, Goliath is coming out to challenge the armies of Israel, and there's nobody challenging him back. So he's clearly big enough to put the fear of God in all of Israel. So if Goliath is only 6 feet 6 inches tall, and Saul has to be at least over 6 feet tall, if not 6 feet 6 inches tall himself. Yeah, I'm taking it there. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm saying is, ain't nobody scared of nobody that's 6 feet 6 inches. Even if you 5'3". Because the dude I saw in Cracker Barrel a couple days ago, I wouldn't have been scared to fight him. As a matter of fact, I would have put my money on me. I think I would have won. Ain't nobody scared of nobody that's 6 feet 6 inches. Look at my face. Ain't nobody scared of nobody that's 6 feet 6 inches. I'm giving it to you real. I ain't even trying to be funny. I don't understand how the people who think Goliath was 6 feet 6 inches, I don't understand how they think that, because Ain't nobody scared of nobody that's 6 feet 6 inches. I've seen some dudes who are big. I've seen dudes that are like 6'8", 6'9", 6'10". The biggest dude I ever seen was 7'4", and I'm not even talking about him. I saw a dude he had to be like 6'8", 6'9", 6'10", and he was a gargantuan. And he was like a football player, and I'm telling you, man, I wouldn't have wanted to fight that dude. You know what I'm saying? But what I'm saying is, I got a friend named Andre Bankhead, who about 6'1". I bet you he would have fought that big 6'9", 6'10" dude. And Andre most likely, I would have put my money on him. He probably would have won. So what I'm saying is, in the ranks of Israel, in the ranks of King Saul's army, you seriously think that everybody is flat across the board, 5'3" tall? Or are you gonna be reasonable and say, okay, yeah, it was probably some people that was as tall as like 6 feet or even more? So why would they be scared to fight somebody who was 6 feet 6 inches tall? Jonathan is Saul's son. If Saul is taller than any other man in Israel from the shoulders up, chances are his son is tall.